So I texted her recently, she hasn't answered. I haven't seen everybody used to do it, so I was like. I guess she does. But, yeah.
Are you done? Reagan,
Yes.
are you done?
Okay.
I'm not certain the last time I remember seeing that kid without kids. He was walking around earlier with a sandwich, you know, just. Thank you very much. Little books, okay. All right, number 13, little books. 13.
Hey.
You gonna leave? Yeah, I can do it. Number 13. Let's do all three verses. Number 13, you guys go. Out of the corner of my eye, I just see this thing moving and this bigger thing chasing after it. That's funny. Number 70. 70. Sing to me of heaven. Again, let's do all three verses. Number 70. 29. Here, prayer hymn. I'm really off my game today and don't have the PowerPoint up. Things that need mention on the prayer list this morning. Please keep Joni in your prayers. She's still recovering from gallbladder surgery, and sounds like she's pretty stationary at the moment. So.
Need to keep Dad on there. He's still having problems with that. Still think it's his idle hernia problem that he has.
Okay.
But yeah, he's been having to deal with a lot of pain in a lot of various ways last few months.
Okay. Yes.
Chad's been fighting some sort of stomach bug for the past week.
Okay.
He's been getting sick one day and then feeling fine for the next two, and then getting sick for another day and feeling fine for the next two, and just keeps going on and on.
Did you say Chad?
Mm-hmm.
Please keep Jeremiah Hostetter in your prayers with tests and things he's going through. Steve and Mike and Alan Marshall traveling to Belarus. I don't recall exact dates. I think we were figuring out Thursday. Yeah, they're on. Yeah, it's pretty close if they're not there already. So, yes.
Sierra's in Jamaica.
Sierra's in Jamaica.
Yep.
Jamaica, man.
All right.
For about an hour.
For about an hour.
She got there about an hour ago.
Oh, okay.
For a vacation or something for school?
She went on vacation with Tucker and his family.
I don't know if we have other travelers or anything. Anything else needs mentioned? As far as announcements, today is the nursing home, which to this day I still forget the time. It's 2 o'clock, right?
Yes.
Not 2 there. Okay, 2 o'clock at the nursing home. We have new song sheets, thanks to Barb. Russ and I were saying, even doing it just once a month, it's amazing over time how it's like, man, we need some new song sheets, some other songs. So next Lord's Day is our third week. I think the Monahans, you guys have food, right? Okay. Food will be provided. I would like to have a VBS meeting next Lord's Day, probably, I don't know. Let's go ahead and do it in between. Let's still do our normal afternoon session, but we'll have about a 15-minute meeting. And I mainly just want that to be a time we can look over all the various stuff we got. We have the actual the canister, right, with the curriculum. That's back there. Okay. Kind of glance over stuff. I'd like to get an idea of who can participate this year. Answer any questions. I mean, we'll spend about 15 minutes doing that this next Lord's Day. The fourth Lord's Day, James and Elijah Bueller will be here. I assume Elijah's preaching, I believe. Our family will be down in Tennessee. So.
Matthew,
Yes.
the first Sunday in April is Easter.
Okay. Yeah, we haven't talked about that at all. What did we do last year? What was I don't recall. Did we we fit in a breakfast as opposed to an afternoon?
It's a pigeon breakfast.
Is that what we did?
I think so.
I really liked what we did last year. I just can't remember the details.
I really liked it, but
I really did. Like I just. Did we, I think we did like a fellowship breakfast during our normal first hour, and then we had our second hour, and then that was it. But does that sound right? Does that make sense? Okay. I will make a sign-up sheet. We'll do it that way, if that's okay.
I don't think we had.
No, that's why I liked it. We weren't getting up at 5 a.m. or whatever. I think some farmers started that. So
Well, in that case,
so instead of the congregation providing a meal, we would have.
can the congregation do the second Sunday then?
Well, the second Sunday is always the.
Oh, the rest home.
Is the, yeah.
Okay.
Was next month the month we didn't have someone signed up? No. Don't worry. Let's just do a pitch in.
If it's us,
Huh?
it might be us, in which case.
No, that's fine. We'll still do it. We'll save the
April
congregation.
I surely didn't sign up.
Well, we're getting down in, Ken and I wanted to do it one Sunday, but that third Sunday in April, we're getting really close to moving.
Okay.
So I guess we'll talk about it.
That's fine. Yeah, at the moment, there's not a fifth Sunday in April, is there? There is a fifth Sunday in April. So how about well, you said you're potentially moving in April though, right?
Uh-huh. We don't have to figure it out. right
Let's
now.
talk more about it, but I would think the congregation could maybe do the meal the fifth Sunday,
Okay.
which would be fine.
Okay.
So first Sunday
So-
might be,
First Sunday, am I correct? That is Resurrection Day. That's Easter.
Yeah.
April 1st. April Fool's Day. So if that's the case, I will pass around a sign-up sheet. We will have a pitch-in fellowship breakfast from 9:30 to 10:30, and then we'll have our normal second hour, and then that'll be it. Then we'll be done. Thank you for bringing that up. That's kind of snuck up on me. Clear as mud. All right, that's what we're going for. Other announcements. All righty. Anything else need to mention on the prayer list? Diane, any updates on, she's,
My mom's home, but it looks like she'll be moving to an apartment soon.
Okay.
Like in maybe the next week.
okay,
After 55 years in the same place. It's like I was telling my sisters the other day, I walk into this one room, she wasn't there, so I'm snooping around the house. In one room, I found 12 pounds of sugar and 12 cake mixes. That's just sitting on top of the big freezer. So you can imagine.
I remember going to visit you when you and mom were dating. That it was the most kid unfriendly house I had ever been
It's
to.
most people unfriendly.
I am just like, what does Russ do? Like, how do you, I mean, I don't think, does she even have TV?
But
I don't know if she did then.
she didn't, she did, but it never was hooked up. You can run
I
video.
mean, there was no yard, there was no basketball goal, there was nothing. I mean, I was 15, I think.
there was no pizza
There-
delivery, that's.
There was a river and you went down and ran around down the river and
No.
fished and waded around.
Maybe I should say the most city slicker kid unfriendly house that I've ever been to.
Played stickball.
Okay, 29. Is that right? Now I'm getting confused on my list. Okay, 29, little books. Let's do the first verse of number 29, and then I'll have prayer for us this morning. My soul has hope till it found me, and on this game lies empty slave. My heart returns to love. God of heaven, we thank you always for the blessings that you give, Lord. But Lord, we especially thank you that you have given us access to your throne. Lord, to come before our Creator and to praise you for the great God that you are, Lord, to know that you have laid the foundations of the earth and the heavens are the works of your hands. Lord, to request of you things in this life, Lord, to request of you strength and, Lord, faithfulness, and Lord, to request of help in time of need. And Lord, we just thank you that you hear those prayers, and pray, Lord, that your will would be done in all things as we ask of them. Lord, things have been mentioned this morning of both brethren within the church and those outside the church that are suffering from various physical things. Lord, I also want to remember what was mentioned this morning of little Sam with his eardrum. And Lord, just those that are dealing with physical things create a stumbling block, create a distraction in this life. And Lord, I just pray that in those situations that we might act as Christ would. Lord, I pray that we can provide encouragement to one another through those things, that we can overcome those things individually and persevere, Lord, knowing that those things generate proven character and have a true spiritual purpose. Lord, I pray for the spiritual needs, both of this congregation and for this community and those around us, Lord, that you might strengthen us to show that love, be ready to show that compassion, Lord, to those in need. Lord, be prepared to show them Christ, not only in our actions, but also through your word, Lord, show them the love that is available to them, and that they can have a true hope in this life of being in glory with you one day, and that empower them to walk this life as you would have them walk. Lord, we thank you for providing the needs of this congregation. We thank you for our bond with brethren throughout the world, and as they assemble this morning, and all the efforts that are made. Lord, we just pray for those efforts that they would be fruitful and effective for you. Lord, we pray for Jeremiah Hostetter as he's dealing with the things that he's dealing with. Pray for the ministry in Cameroon, Lord, that it would remain strong in their absence. Lord, we just pray for all the many things that have been mentioned and many things that have not been mentioned. Lord, you know the needs of your people. Lord, we see the sparrow, that it does not hunger and have trouble finding food, Lord, and how much more you care for us than you do the sparrow. And Lord, I just thank you for that love, and pray, Lord, that our time this morning, again, can be effective and encouraging as things in Jesus' name. Amen. Number 28. And again, let's do the first verse, and then the guys will come forward for the Lord's Supper.
You know, this time that we spend together this morning, this time here, I mean, whatever we call it, you know, I think we do something that I don't believe the first century church did. We have somehow kind of segmented. I think it's just modern people as we've become more time oriented. We somehow segmented our assembly time. And of course, Sunday school is all by itself. We can thank people from the 1940s and 50s for that. They made sure that was separate. But we have, you know, as the world's creeped into the church sometimes, if you go to some of your old churches of Christ, you have worship time. Don't get me started. And then you have Lord's Supper time. And then you may have, you know, special music time and prayer time. And we kind of break it all into these different little 10-minute windows, 5-minute windows. And if the guy doing the Lord's Supper goes too long, he probably won't get asked to do the Lord's Supper again for a while. And, you know, it just all very time oriented. Whatever we call this time this morning, some would call it Lord's Supper time. I agree. Some would call it communion. I agree. Some would call it the passing and sharing of the emblems. Okay. We'll work on that one. Whatever it is, this time is central and important to our life and our worship as the body of Christ. And I don't think that we should give this time any more importance than we do any of the rest of the time. You know, we often hear people say, well, the reason for gathering together is for the breaking of the bread. But it was for some other reasons too, okay? And, you know, worship isn't confined to Sunday morning. I think we all know that. Communion with Christ isn't confined to Sunday morning. You know, we know that worship is something that we do every day, day in, day out, hour in, hour out, minute in, minute out, word in, word out of your mouth. Every thought, every action is to be worshiped to our Father in heaven. It is to honor God with our work ethics, with our morals, with our language, with our attitude, and with our thoughts. We're supposed to honor God 24 hours a day. Communion with Christ has to be continual as well. We don't cease to be the church when we go out the door. Even if we don't act like we should, we are still the church and representing the church and communicating the church to the people around us. We don't cease to be the church when we leave, when we go home. So wherever we are, we have to continue to feed on the bread of life, or we're going to die. If the only meal you get is this one, and I don't mean the bread and the juice, but if the only meal you get for your spiritual body is this one, you're going to die. Unless every hour of every day, we as the church abide in God and have his living word actually flowing out of us, then we don't have a daily life. We have a daily death. You're a dead man walking. If we don't live every moment spiritually kneeled in front of the throne of God, you're going to die for a lack of spiritual oxygen. These are a reminder of the constant presence of Christ in our lives. John 15, Jesus says, "Abide in me, and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit of itself unless it abides in the vine, so neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. He who abides in me, and I in him, he bears much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If anyone does not abide in me, he is thrown away as a branch, dries up, they gather them, they cast them in the fire, and they are burned." Let's pray.
Most loving and gracious Heavenly Father, again, Lord, we thank you so very much for the wonderful gift of your Son. For without him and the great sacrifice that was made, and because of your love for us, that we will not be able to truly have a relationship and fellowship with you. Lord, we ask you to watch over us as we partake of this bread and this cup, and to remember that sacrifice that was made. And again, truly just how much you loved each and every single one of us. You give us the gift of your Son. Your Son, Jesus Christ's name we pray. Amen.
I had lunch with Grandma this week and kind of talking about some of the technology things that have come about. And a lot of it is just amazing, and the convenience and the makes things more efficient and more effective. But I've always joked that technology is wonderful when it works. And this morning it failed me. I had my sermon prepared and saved it at home, which normally then syncs it to my Google Drive here at the church building, and I bring it up and print it, but alas, it's not there.
It's probably edited and deemed not fit to be on.
Possibly, yeah, that's possible too. So that's okay, actually. I had wanted to sort of do an update on Signani a little bit. I have some email information from Steve. But what I wanted to do this morning was say a few words just as a reminder of kind of our involvement with them. I want us to be familiar with that work. Me reading through the information that the Eisenagels have provided isn't going to take a long time, but what I wanted to do is just sort of have an open discussion. If anyone has any questions, either that I can answer, or if I can't answer, I would love to then go back to the Brethren in Signani and ask those questions, just so we have a little more of an intimate familiarity with them. But first of all, just as a reminder, the reason that we participate there is about the overriding message within Scripture that the gospel of Christ is made available for every part of the earth and every individual. In Revelation 14:6, it says, "And I saw another angel flying in mid-heaven, having an eternal gospel to preach to those who live on the earth and to every nation and tribe and tongue and people." So that gospel is made available for all. We see that over and over again there in the New Testament, that was the goal, was to spread that thing to all peoples everywhere. Go therefore into all nations. Go therefore into all nations, all the earth, baptizing. Okay, we see that as a focus there in Acts chapter 13 of God literally saying, set apart Paul and Barnabas to go out and start taking this message. Okay, set them apart. So, the wonderful thing, again, with technology and communication, is we can be much more intimately involved with some of these works that we're participating in an effort for the gospel to be active and working in other parts of the world. Not to say that it doesn't need to be active and working here, okay, but it gives us a chance to be part of that. So, just as a little, again, there's going to be participation this morning. Do you guys know, can you tell me of our money or our gifts that go towards efforts elsewhere outside of Connorsville, what we give to as a congregation? Anybody know? Dollars and who?
For Graham and Ruth.
Graham and Ruth? Anyone know how much?
What's that, 200?
$250 a month towards Graham and Ruth, and specifically the efforts of the clinic there. What else?
$100 to Olga every month.
$100 to Olga. Who is Olga?
It helps the girls try to keep them out of the trafficking.
When they
and all
age
that
out of the homes.
Yep.
in Russia.
So Olga is an individual that has a ministry in Belarus. Olga is Pentecostal, but she has become a solid contact, a direct connect, obviously, in the, as that relationship builds and forms. But mainly what she is doing, Direct Connect Views is probably one of the greatest full circle efforts of trying to eliminate the problem of human trafficking and just a vicious cycle of orphan having child that becomes an orphan, that has a child that becomes an orphan. So what Olga does is she has phenomenal relationships with orphanages, but in the Belarusian orphanage system, when you become 15, you're kicked out the door, given a piece of paper that says, show up to this government office and they'll try to get you started. Well, guess how many kids ever show up? Very, very few. Okay. So Olga then brings them into almost like a dormitory with a dorm mom. She has apartments that she gets funded through her ministry. She teaches those girls and guys life skills and tries to help them transition into adulthood, and obviously gives them spiritual principles as well. One really neat thing about the coffee shop initiative that Jeff Bisco is working on, possibly with Direct Connect, is to try to further help that transition. The hope is that coffee shop employs Olga's kids, employs them. Okay, so it gives them a job opportunity, gives them an income opportunity, just further expands the ability to train those kids. So we give $100 to Olga to strengthen that relationship, and ultimately because that work is a good work. Okay, that's good things that are done. And then Signani. Does anyone know how much we give to Signani?
$850, I think, or $800.
800. 800 is what we give to Signani. Okay. So Signani, I think everyone here is pretty familiar, maybe some not. The Signani work was started by Steve and Jennifer Eisnagel. Steve, I don't know the details on the time frame there, but Steve was sort of a trainee of Jeff Hostetter. And when he and Jennifer got married, which their marriage story is pretty interesting, if you ever want to ask them. I think they met once, before they got engaged, something like that. But to me, it's kind of it's a pure example of love and commitment, but grounded on faith. You know, if you guys, if the two spouses truly have that as a foundation, then you know it works out. So they have a pretty interesting story there, but they started that work and built that work up, started training individuals, and similar to Jeff Hostetter's approach, a big oomph of that ministry is that school, because they can offer English, you know, they can offer things that are desired by non-religious parents in that particular country. So that gives them the opportunity to train these kids. And as they're raising up these kids, it's giving opportunities with parents and the kids. And they're training them up and working with them to become, you know, Christian individuals. Okay. So many years ago, Steve was sort of requested to possibly come back and fill a role in the United States. In Bozeman, Montana. You know, Jay, everyone knows that Jay travels significantly, has a huge amount of activity. So Steve was inquired to potentially come back and work there in Montana. Well, when they came back, Steve and Jennifer had taken the traditional missionary approach of coming back every couple of years and, to not sugarcoat it, soliciting funds to help the ministry run. Well, when the white people came back, a lot of those funds disappeared, because the assumption is well, there's no work anymore because there's no white missionaries there. Well, that's silly. You know, Steve's approach was to train up people that could continue the work, and the work did continue. So when they came back, a lot of that funding stopped, and that's where we remained consistent. Over the course of a couple of years, you know, the Eisenagles kind of determined they really would love to be back in Ghana. But one thing I really respect about Steve is Steve did not like the idea of having to solicit or prospect funds for that ministry, which I really respect. He wanted to be, if at all possible, self-funding. So an individual in the Brotherhood that has a very successful business person, has, you know, financial means, told Steve and Jennifer that here's the deal. I will fund you guys solely to go back for 1 year and give you the opportunity to become self-funding. And Steve and Jennifer were ecstatic, because Steve knew that the Ghana that they left, he could easily go back and get a very good job and become a self-funding missionary. Well, they went back, and the Ghana that they left had changed quite drastically from a very American-friendly, American-focused concept to a very, we don't really like Americans that much anymore. You know, if there's a job opening, the Ghanaian gets it first, not the American. We don't care what their skills are. We don't care if they're multilingual. None of that matters. So Steve and Jennifer were there for approximately maybe 20 months, maybe close to 2 years. And that individual continued to fund them, but Steve was convicted to not rely on that. He didn't want to necessarily solicit funds. So that is why they returned to the United States. Okay. While they were there, they continued to work with the work in Sinyani, but they returned to the United States to sort of regroup. And, you know, I think some of their thoughts have changed even since they've come back. Steve and Jennifer told me when they were here that their passion was to be missionaries overseas. Well, I think that's changed somewhat from my last visit with Steve and Jennifer. They would love to go and provide support to missions on maybe like a month-long basis. Eventually, that's their goal. But just dealing with the financial realities of life, that's kind of the mode they're in at the moment. So ever since the Eisenagles first came back, probably around 2010-ish, 2000, it's been a long time.
They had Indiana.
Well, they came back. They were at our, well, we can do the timing here. They came back since we were in our home this time. So that was probably what, 2 years ago? You think 3 years? So 3 years ago, they had been in Ghana for 2 years. So that takes us back to 5 years. And they had been in the United States prior to that for at least 2 or 3 years.
Oh, you mean when they came back?
Initially, yeah.
Okay.
So we're at least probably 8 years back, probably 2009. I was wanting to say 10. 2009, 2008 is when they came back initially. And that's when funding, a lot of that went away. And to give you guys an idea, all funding still routes through me for the Signani Brethren. Other than our amount, and now that the Eisenagels are back and are an income earning family, they contribute their tithe largely to Signani. Other than that money, $200 a month comes in for the Signani Brethren. So our $800, $200, and then whatever the Eisenagels give is what goes there. While the Eisenagels were over there, it was just our 800 plus the 200. It was $1,000 coming in, and that's when, you know, I kind of became aware that, you know, Mr. Boateng was having to work, you know, and stuff to supplement, and we increased our giving a little bit. But then when the Eisenagels came back, they have conveyed to me that financially there aren't issues like that. Really, the things that I want us to be more aware of are just some spiritual things that, you know, that they're dealing with. So, you know, the two individuals really driving the work over there are Mr. Boateng and Mr. Anthony. Mr. Anthony, if I'm not mistaken, and again, this is the type of question that I could ask, I'm pretty sure Mr. Anthony had some history in the school actually as a student early on with Steve and Jennifer. Mr. Boateng is older in age, so I don't believe he was a student in the school, but he was a convert in some way. So they've been continuing that work. They have the school there. They have the congregation there in Signani. We know we're praying about, you know, their living situation that they had to move. And what I want to do now is I want to read this email, and I think it will generate potentially some questions. I know it generated some questions for me that I can then go back to them and would like to hit on here. Wait for it. Yes, he is. I can hear you whispering. I have a pretty small inbox, but for some reason. Steve Doty. All right.
Modern technology.
I moved the thing somewhere. I don't. I know that's what I had to do because I don't know where I moved it. All right, Matt. Here's Jen's thought. So also to give you an update, because I think both Steve and Jennifer work for, is it TSA, the airport security?
Yeah.
They get to fly anywhere for free. I'm kind of jealous. So Jennifer just flew to Ghana to visit. You guys also, I I think you know that before they came back this last time, they adopted a boy there, that they have been still making efforts for years to try to eventually get that over. As far as Ghana was concerned, the adoption was legit, everything was fine, but the United States refused to accept it. So Jennifer went over there to visit with Stephen, but also got to visit with the church congregation. And these are some thoughts from Jennifer's trip, okay? Which again created some follow-up questions on my part. And if the congregation has any, I'd really like to present those back to Steve and the brothers together. So this is from Steve. Matt, here are Jen's thoughts on her time in Ghana. Mr. Boateng and Mr. Anthony are faithful men. They are good men. They've been faithfully running the school and church in Sinyani. Mr. Boateng's family, they just had a baby in September. Her name is Stella. If I'm not mistaken, that's probably kid number 6 or 7. I know whenever I presented Sinyani as our mission in the second year of VBS, they had 5 kids. So that was 4 or 5 years ago. Their oldest son, Stephen, who is 17, is in his second year at a boarding school in Kumasi. That was my first question around the school as to what grade that it goes to. I know Rachel and I were talking that, okay, so the Boateng's oldest son, Stephen, I'm pretty certain is different from Steve and Jennifer's Stephen. Okay, but the Boatengs are taking care of Steve and Jennifer's Stephen. We're pretty certain.
Because she had to put him in the boarding school because the United States said since someone else is caring for him, they can't adopt him.
Correct. So
She had to make him.
I asked the question to Steve, why would the Boateng's oldest son be in boarding school? I'm wondering if the answer will be so that Steve and Jennifer Stephen, they might be in that together, if that makes sense. But again, I'm waiting on a reply for that. So their oldest son, Stephen, who is 17, is in his second year at a boarding school in Kumasi. Their second son, Samuel, 15, is in a local junior high school. Again, my question was, is the school only going up to a certain age, or does it work differently over in Ghana? Their next 3 children are still in the Christian school. They have a good 3-bedroom house that they are renting. Mr. Boateng has been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. He's been dealing with this for over 6 months. He has lost a lot of his vision and cannot see to read. Mr. Boateng. They have no solution for him at this time. He really wants to get this figured out so that he can read his Bible, do Bible studies, and help in the school. Mr. Anthony's family. Mr. Anthony, his wife, and 2 daughters live in the same building that the church and the school meet in. One of his wife's relatives, a preteen girl, is staying with them and is in the school. She has learned English and how to read. Mr. Anthony is the main one in the school right now. Timothy, a young man that lives with the Boatengs, also helps full-time in the school. Mr. Anthony has glaucoma, which has begun to affect him some as well. He can still see, though, and can do what he needs to. They just moved to a new building that is close to where they had been staying. It is basically the same setup as the last place, except the church is not allowed to meet inside the large living area, which is what they have been doing at the last 2 places that they have stayed. So again, that generated questions because I knew time-wise, I thought they had been at the same place for many years and had to move. So I'm wondering if they've had to do a couple moves in the last few months, possibly. They have been told that they will have to put up a temporary structure in the yard for church meetings. This is not ideal, but at least it buys them another year. The school has 12 students, all of which are part of families in the church. They have had a few other students from outside the church who come for a year or 2. They learn to speak English and read and then transfer to other schools. One of the faithful men in the church, Kofi Sergian, who had been there for around 30 years, passed away this past year. That was a little challenging for the congregation. However, there are still several faithful families. Jen couldn't tell me a lot about the Bible studies going on. She knows that they are still having studies and that they still go to Japakram, which Japakram was the second congregation that they were, I don't know the distance. I want to say it was an hour or 2 that they drive every Lord's Day for that congregation. She wasn't sure about much beyond that. She was very focused on helping our son, Stephen, get set up in boarding school there and make sure that he was going to be able to still go to the assemblies. Mr. Boateng's health looks to be a major issue. I don't think the doctors know what to do. He has drastically changed his diet to try to help, but his blood sugar is still high. If they could get that under control, then they would be able to get glasses for him. At this point in time, he is very limited. I know that it has been very difficult for him not to be able to do much. It is also difficult for Mr. Anthony since he has had to shoulder the work that they shared before. Please keep these men in your prayers. I hope this helps give a little bit of a window into the Lord's Church in Signani. My greetings to all the saints in Connorsville. In Christ, Steve Eisnottle. I already followed up with 3 questions. I said, you mentioned that the Boateng's oldest kids are in other schools. Does the Christian school not go up to a maximum grade? I said, is there anything from the states that can be done to help Mr. Boateng? Medicine, some other type of support, trying to figure out the limitations there. And then I said, so just to clarify, they did find another location after being kicked out of the place they had been for a number of years. Mr. Anthony and his family lived there, which is where the school is done. Is that correct? So the old building that they had, at one point in time, I thought for many years, there were 2 houses. One house was the Boateng family's house. The other house was the school, the church meeting location, and the Anthony's house. That is the house that I believe the owner for many, many years either passed away and it went on to that individual's heirs, but ultimately they were told you need to get out in a number of months because we're going to sell it or do something else with. So that's kind of currently what's going on. Are there any questions that for you to feel a little more attached or anything regarding the ministry? I mean, the Eisenagels and Mr. Boateng and Mr. Anthony are very open to providing that. Any questions that the congregation would have that you'd like me to forward on? Yes.
What exactly? I mean, it seems like they need finances. What exactly does the money go towards?
Their money goes towards, yes, it goes towards rent. It goes towards living expenses for the families. It goes towards all the curriculum that they utilize in the school. It goes towards anything that the congregation would utilize. And keep in mind, and I've had conversations with Steve about this. I think there's probably an extremely small amount of giving within the congregation. It's just you are dealing with a third world country with very limited money. I have come to understand that the average monthly wage over there is somewhere in the vicinity of 100 to 200 American dollars. So if someone was giving, I mean, you're talking about a few dollars a month, and yet this rent is still just insane. I mean, I've asked Steve multiple times, like, how do people do it? He's like, you got to understand, most of the places that people are renting is like $300 for 2 years. It's not, $2,000 for 2 years. So, the people, in a facility that can be used for a church meeting and a school and for all this type of stuff is a nicer facility than where a lot of people are living. A lot of people are living families living in a studio apartment that's about 140, 150 square feet that they pay maybe $300 for an entire year for. So in this case, that's why something else that I don't have full clarification on, over there is they have got larger gifts in the past, and that is what they have used to both buy land and buy building materials with the hope of eventually getting a building erected that both families can live in, and the church and the school, and not just be beaten up so hard on rent, because the rent just, it beats them up over.
How far away are they from doing that?
I'll ask that where they're at in the process. I know they sent some pictures at one point in time, but I don't know cost wise where they're at or what it would take to complete. So.
Is the church moving forward? Is it growing? I realize there's health issues with both men, but are they training up Timothy's to carry on?
trainer, Steve.
Steve, well, again, for example,
Stevens are pretty good too.
I know in that email, that individual that they mentioned, where was that at?
Kofi?
Well, Kofi was the individual that passed away. They said there was a young man, Timothy, his name's Timothy. Timothy, a young man that lives with the Boatengs, also helps full-time in the school. I don't know Timothy's story, though. I don't know if Timothy grew up in the congregation. So I'll maybe ask about if they have any stories about any young people that have graduated the school, or if there's continued involvement there.
I think I shared something.
Yes, uh-huh.
I know that when Steve Eisnagel, when the Eisnagels were over there and his mother Barbara went over to stay with them for a while, she was probably 60s. She was widowed. And she told me that the Ghanaians were just amazed to see her in her 60s and still reasonably healthy. Their average lifespan over there is way shorter
Oh, yeah.
than here, way shorter.
Yeah.
And that they were just amazed to see somebody in their 60s that was in as good a shape as she was. So I know that there's constant battles with just clean water and.
I mean, even in Belarus, I think I looked up life expectancy. It's in the late 60s, early 70s. I mean, in the United States, it's up to the mid 80s, I believe. Might be high 80s. But you go to a third world country like this, and when you start averaging through this kind of stuff, life expectancies dip down into the 50s. I mean, and Mr. Watt, I don't know. I'll ask that. Mr. Boateng, I want to say he's at least mid to late 40s, I think. I mean, I don't think he's a younger. Mr. Anthony, I think, is significantly younger than Mr. Boateng, maybe by 10 years or so.
But
But-
the medical care over there is practically non-existent.
Right.
It's pretty deplorable, so he's not gonna get treatment
Right.
he needs.
Well, and that's why I asked if it's a medicine thing, if that could be just something to fix the thing. I don't know. I have no idea. So, any other questions? Anything that you would like to know or that I could ask or forward along? It might take a while to get an answer, but I mean, I want us to have a greater familiarity with that. I'd really like to get over there at some point. Some point I'm going to substitute a trip over there in for a Belarus trip just so I can have kind of a firsthand account. So. We asked for an update just on their families in general.
So that giving basically supports the family so that the men can teach in the school and go to
Correct.
school. And
Yep.
because they have tried to work part-time jobs, I know, and do all the Bible studies
Right.
and do all the schools and have a family.
Right.
So the money provides for their families. And when
Correct.
you think about the amount of money you referred to, two larger families and a congregation and a school are all provided for on that amount of
Correct.
money. It would take 10, 20 times that here.
Yeah, and that's exactly what it does. It deals with every aspect, facilities, groceries, anything, transportation, all that kind of stuff so that they can function ultimately as missionaries over there. That's the thing is, again, I'm very proud of our congregation that we had more, I think, of a spiritual perception there, that just because the white guys fought with the white family came back doesn't mean the work didn't continue. Well, if the work is going to continue in the method that Steve and Jennifer were performing it, that's where Mr. Anthony and Mr. Boateng stepped in. So, any other questions that anyone would like me to submit, or just curiosities about anything about Ghana or the congregation there? Or
How far away are they from Hostetter's?
about 2.5 hours from Kumasi.
And is there any update on when being able to get Steven?
On
over
Steven?
here?
I'll ask that.
That's
I know.
been going on for a long time.
Well, I know it was probably a year ago. She mentioned something on Facebook. They pretty much were starting from square one. Like they got a new attorney and everything was brand new. So
weird that America wouldn't let him.
They've recently redid their complete home study and everything. The new attorney advised starting completely from scratch and
Yeah.
not using anything they've done before. So they did a new home study just in the past few months, I think. And then that's why they had to board him, because they had to show that he's not being cared for by anyone but state or Ghana, basically. So that he kind of looks like he's an orphan that they're adopting.
She said actually they adopted him over there before they came back.
right, yeah,
But she said actually they shouldn't have done that, because if he had been an orphan over there, they could have adopted him here. The states
yeah,
would have
it's
allowed him in.
silly.
But because his mother gave him up to them, then the state saw that differently.
Yeah.
And would
It's really
allow him.
strange the way it's all been. I mean,
Yeah.
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 well, you know, I just got to thinking too how long they've been back already. We went to Montana Family Camp 2.5 years ago. Is that right?
Yeah.
And they were there. I remember that was the first time visiting with them since they had come back. So, I mean, they've been here at least 3 years and they've been dealing. And I remember then, I mean, I was just like, is the Stephen thing about to happen? You know, I remember standing with them at Montana Family Camp and asking, and it was just a big mess. And I bet they've spent $10,000 to $20,000 trying to deal with all this, if not more. So,
Stephen's story is kind of interesting because his mom was a young lady who came into their home. She was pregnant, then became a Christian. And over there's not a culture of family at all. People literally just turn the little children out on the streets and let them survive during the day, and hopefully they find their way home at night. It's just horrible. But this young woman, in becoming a Christian, wanted her child to be raised correctly, and she wanted to learn how to be a mother. So she asked them if she could live with them so that they could teach her that. So Jennifer actually delivered him because they couldn't make it to the hospital. She delivered Stephen, and they always lived there in their home. But around the time they came back to the States the first time, Stephen's mother remarried, and the new husband took them way from the church. And once they had children, he started treating Stephen very, very badly. So that's when he came back to live with when the ISIS came back, and he was allowed to move back to the school and the church. So it's been his entire life that they have been involved with. And that's why they want him here with them.
any final questions anyone can think of? All righty. Hope that's a little informative. I mean, guys, I don't just want that to be, the decision was made, I think, when I was 15 years old, but I've always respected that our congregation gives a larger amount to a primary work, largely so we're more involved. So as time marches on, I don't want us to be unfamiliar with that work or there not to be an accountability there on that end. So, I mean, don't ever be hesitant to, hey, can you check in with them on this or ask about this? And the whole point for that is, I think when the guys talked about it 12 years ago or whenever that decision was made, was so that we're not sending $10 to 1,000 different places that don't even really know who we are. I mean, I don't like that. That wouldn't be the point of being involved. The point we're involved is so that we are directly involved with an additional effort to get the gospel into various parts of the world. That's why we're involved with that. So, all righty. We'll finish up this morning. We'll go to number 90. Again, we're at the nursing home at 2 p.m. Anything else that needs mentioned this morning?
Matthew,
Yes.
I just want to let everybody know how much I appreciate your prayers for Chad and Leah and the boys. Leah came home yesterday, and Ozzy is coming home tomorrow.
Great. Praise God.
So that's
Fantastic.
wonderful news.
Good deal. Anything else that needs mentioned? Other announcements or anything? All right. Good to see everybody. Please keep those in prayer again, with Joni out kind of recovering, and I did want to, please keep, I don't know, an update on Sam, but did she mention that? She didn't mention that on Thursday. She mentioned that last Sunday, didn't she?
It just happened.
With his eardrum stuff, so. All right, let's go ahead and stand, and let's do the first verse of number 90, and then we'll be dismissed. On the cross, he sealed my pardon, paid the debt, and made me free.
It's Patty's birthday.
Oh,
We didn't sing.
any other birthdays? All right, happy birthday. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, God bless you. Happy birthday to you.
You're fun though. Slow down, slow down.
Oh, wait. I haven't had a hug all day.
You asked for it,
Now you can
Grammy.
go.
That is really good news.
Nothing is fixed. It's freeze tag. Okay. They know. I'm like freeze tag. Little tag. No. Everyone's playing for future play. But only the steps are fixed. No, these are fixed. No, it's steps. No.
Hey, do not hit that. Be careful.
I did it. Everything's fine.
Does anyone else want shirts? If not, they're being filed in, what is that, file 13 or whatever? We can do that. Okay. How do you do that?
Why do you want to play FaceTime? No, but. Oh, there's no base on FaceTime. There's no base on FaceTime. You know what? When I play FaceTime. Hello? Do you want to play FaceTime?
Yeah.
Why am I just do that? And I'm bad at prisoners of war. Like, let's play tag.
It'll be interesting to see.
And they really get
show
on
up around town.
stage. No, freeze tag. Freeze. Untag. I got you, Ellie. Nothing is fixed, remember? Ellie, there's no base. Ellie, there's no base. Nothing is fixed. Freeze. Nothing is base. I'm freeze. Okay, but nothing is base, okay? We can only get hurt. Ellie, help me!
See, Albert is all done.